Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am Dr. Paul Bloomberg, the founder and CEO of the Core Collaborative Learning Network. This is how you can reach me on Twitter tonight. We're really excited to have a special collaborative conversation. This will also be on our YouTube channel because we know that we get a lot of post views. And you can also reach out to us at info@thecorecollaborative.com if you happen to see this on social media to get more information. Tonight, we are really excited that we have our Rigorous PBL design team as a panel discussion to really dig in to a lot of the new research that just came out. Dr. Michael McDowell is leading this team, and the whole team, Kelly, Aaron, and Brad, will be answering questions from you, but we have a lot of questions that we thought would really be important to gain a deeper understanding as to how our framework for PBL is so different than other PBL frameworks out there. So we also have towards the end, we're gonna meet a couple of authors from a new book from our sister press company, Mimi and Todd, Carrie Rosebach and Sarah Henry, and they wrote Arrow's A Systems-Based Approach to School Leadership, and you'll hear from them about the last 5 minutes. Our agenda for tonight, we are not gonna do introductions via Zoom breakout. That was a really great idea this morning. At 5 a.m., but I've just decided that we're not going to do that. We are going to engage in the panel. We will do a quick breakout mid-panel so you all can kind of talk to each other about some key ideas that you're learning, and then we'll end with meeting the Arrow's author. Our hashtag is honoring impact. And you can find more out about Rigorous PBL at rigorousPBL.com, and that'll go straight to our website, to our Rigorous PBL by Design pathway. So without further ado, I'm gonna unshare my screen, and for some reason, I can't figure out how to unshare my screen. So that ought to be fun. There we go.
Like a project.
So, yeah, there we go. It disappeared on me for a second. Having two screens, I'm still not used to. So anyway, I want to just start with our panel, and Isaac Wells is our Director of Professional Learning. He's joining us tonight. Sarah, our Director of Quality Implementation, you can wave. Star, our publisher for Mimi and Todd. And we will hear from the authors of Arrows towards the end. So I wanted to start with our panel by getting acquainted, our audience getting acquainted with you. This is also being streamed to Facebook Live as well. And someone will be monitoring that as if there's any sorts of questions coming in. But one way that I thought might be kind of fun as a good way to get to know you is I know that you are all really invested clearly and Rigorous PBL by Design. So I thought it would really be kind of cool. We are doing a campaign around honoring impact. And the idea behind the campaign is that we believe that educators and parents aren't being honored enough for the impact that they're making in the education of our students. And so I thought what would be kind of fun is if we started by you introducing yourself, telling a brief thing about you, but just honoring maybe a person or somebody that got you involved with PBL. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Awesome. Who wants to go first?
Hey, I'll give it a go, Paul.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for having us here. Hey, everybody, Michael McDowell. I was thinking about this question earlier, and I just I think about a professor in college. Her name is Dr. Barbara Murray, and what I loved about her is that she was really hard, really challenging, but also really supportive. And she always provided these really interesting problems that were interdisciplinary. She would connect organic chemistry to mathematics, to what was happening actually out in the real world. And I just love that she was able to provide this level of integration. But at the same time, there was just a high level of rigor with it. And for some reason, she was able to balance all that with a high level of care and empathy. And this was not a class that I was looking forward to taking. I did not go to college to be like, I really want to take OChem. But it was a class I actually felt like I could be successful in because of Dr. Murray. So it was great to even just, your question, to just think back to someone that really made a huge impact on me and actually really pushed me into teaching. So it would be Dr. Murray.
It's kind of interesting. We were interviewing some kids at PS 68, and the teachers were shocked that the kids wanted more challenge. And they found out that the kids were going home and getting on some math app because they thought that the math was more challenging on the app than in class. So it's kind of interesting to me. We kind of think that learners don't like challenge, but it's pretty much the opposite. So it's kind of cool that you found that person in your memory as you were trying to figure out who to honor. Who's next?
I'll go. Brad Seaver, and it's just an honor and a pleasure to be with everyone tonight. So grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with you all. And I would say, as I thought about this question, when I got introduced to project-based learning, I was serving as an instructional coach. And in that role, I just had an opportunity to read a lot of great professional development books and attend a lot of professional development conferences. And, I would sit into these conferences and read these books and these PD sessions and learn about differentiated instruction and best practice for EL students and literacy strategies. And I'm kind of a holistic thinker, like a comprehensive thinker. And when I first started reading about project-based learning, it was kind of like, I feel like this is a real comprehensive framework that incorporates all these things that I'm learning to be best practices. Now, differentiated instruction, giving students voice and choice, giving them authentic problems and challenges to solve. I read Susie Boss's book and Jane Krause's book, Reinventing Project-Based Learning. I read the old Buck Institute PBL handbook by John Larmer and Tom Markham. And then it really resonated with me when I went to a conference and I heard a science teacher present a project-based learning unit that they had implemented. And this was back in 2006. And actually, coincidentally, that teacher was Michael McDowell. That's kind of how I was introduced. So certainly all of those folks have had an impact on me.
Thank you. That's so cool to hear that story. I was kind of one of those people too. I was really reading about that. I actually was a director of a nonprofit out of UC San Diego called Transformative Inquiry Design for Effective Schools, basically PBL. But boy, did we struggle. And when I read Michael's book, I was like, this was the piece that was missing. And I was sold immediately because we kind of could figure it out, but we couldn't articulate as well as Michael did in his book. Aaron or Kelly, who's next?
Kelly, go ahead. You have the honors.
All right, I'll take it. I'm a little ashamed that I cannot tell you the student's name. So
All right.
forgive me, world. But a really impactful student that I had years ago, he was an 8th grader. And at the end of our project reflection, because we were doing a lot of project-based learning in my class, he said, "This was by far the funnest project I've done all year. I love it. I don't know if I really learned anything, but I had a great time." And that honesty from an 8th grader really pushed me to go a little further and self-reflect and be critical of my own practices. And are my students really leaving my classes with the kind of knowledge and skills that they need to have? So this was some years ago, but I remember we were doing things on paper, and it was a real good look in the mirror.
Yeah.
So he impacted me quite a bit.
So what I hear who you like to honor as someone that just kind of gave you the truth.
Yep.
And honesty. Yes, sometimes those are the best people. Like, I think of the times in my life where I have made the biggest mistakes. I usually write to those people way later, say thank you. I'm sorry that I treated you so bad because you're honest with me.
Yes.
So I appreciate that. Aaron, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, I guess mine's kind of like Michael's in a sense. It started in college. I was always that kid who just always asked the question, like, why do I need to know this information? Why do I need to know this? I'm tired of the tests. And for me, my passion around science, and we had took an environmental science class, and the teacher wasn't even actually a teacher. He is actually from the city of LA. And we started learning about microorganisms and amoebas and protists and all these things. And I'm like, oh, that's cool, like on the vocab test, but who cares? But he brought those things and species to life, and to be able to see the different contexts about like intertidal organisms and, benthic organisms and how these things all relate. And so like, even though it wasn't technically a project, it was really about bringing really hard concepts and tasks and giving and bringing them to life and be like, oh, that's why I need to know about like why coliforms are actually really important in water in LA. So you have grades on beaches and people don't get sick. And here's that byproduct. So just that relevance, continual relevance, and changing that relevance along the way was really inspiring me, really kind of jumpstart me on the path.
Awesome. So we already started in honoring the impact of the folks that really inspired you to get into this work, and I believe love it. And so now we're going to really start the panel, and anybody that's listening, you can also ask questions. Isaac will be watching the chat box, so we can actually answer any questions that you might have as well. But what we're going to start with, and I believe, Michael, you're up, is what is rigorous PBL by design?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's a great question. Rigorous PBL by design is specifically a problem-solving process that's built on 3 levels of complexity, or what we would call rigor. So it's knowing things, being able to relate things, and being able to apply things. And that rigor is really the integration of all 3 of those things. And then the design of rigorous PBL is really making sure that kids are clear on what they're learning. So that helps us develop this level of agency for kids. It's making sure that we teach to those 3 levels. I know things, I can relate things, I can apply things. And then really developing a culture that's really focused more on progress versus proficiency and products. And so it's really about how do we get that 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. And this rigorous PBL by design process was really developed, one, by my own experience, and I think the other panelists' experience is similar to Kelly's experience with the student, where we built this really cool project, but the students didn't learn much. Or the students that learn a lot in terms of the direct instruction, like protists and fungus, but then they don't find that connection. So it's really trying to integrate those 2 pieces together to make sure that we have that innovation, but also rigor.
Yeah, I also, just wanted to touch on, I think that you and I were working with the visible learning team, kind of maybe even at the same time, and we never even met, because I don't think any of us really met. And so, I know that our book did not become popular because of Paul and Barb. John Addy wrote the foreword, but I also know that you use the visible learning synthesis as a way to support what you were doing. And there's also some new research that just came out about PBL. and any of you can kind of talk about this, but I'd like to know a little bit about the evidence base.
Yeah, so I'll just throw two kind of quick pieces out. I think when I started writing Rigorous PBL by Design, I actually reached out to John, because if we remember, John Hattie's meta-analysis really showed problem and project-based learning to have a really low effect size on student learning.
Yeah.
And in 2010, 2009, when he came out with the study, he also shared that about 90% of the studies that were used in that research basis were really testing students at the surface level of instruction, so knowing things. And so what he found is that problem project-based learning really doesn't support that level of learning. Yet in 2016, when he came out with his work with Donahue, and they looked at all three levels of surface and relating and then applying, he actually said, well, hey, some of those strategies work. And I think there's also some myths around PBL, this idea of we have to put kids in groups all the time, this idea that we only look at one situation, this idea that we need to focus on product development, and that direct instruction is an antithesis to what we need to do in PBL, really does create that negative effect. And if we can actually say, well, maybe direct instruction does have a place, and if we start to say, well, maybe we need to look at multiple situations and challenge some of the previous thinking of PBL, it actually can improve this work. And that's where John has endorsed this. And we actually have just found out in the most recent studies, we actually had 3 gold standard randomized studies that were elementary, middle school, and high school, actually looking at advanced placement schools, that when you control the trials of thousands of students in diverse school systems across the US, project-based learning significantly outperformed traditional curricula and raising academic performance across grade levels, socioeconomic groups, and reading ability. And this is from AP down to 3rd grade. So when we can do it correctly, we can actually see a pretty substantial impact on student learning as well as an engagement.
Well, you answered that question. Anyone else on the panel want to add on to that?
I mean, I would hate to overstep Michael. I think he said it really well. So thanks, Michael. I appreciate that one.
Okay, cool. So our next question goes to Kelly, and I know anyone else can add on as well. But what is the difference between rigorous PBL by design, and I think Michael kind of alluded to this, and PBL? But I think let's just get some clarity around this, because I truly believe, after I read the book, I remember I tweeted it out, and Michael, we didn't even know each other. And I said, I love this book because it answered so many questions for me personally. But could you clarify or maybe even add on to what Michael said?
Yeah, I would love to. So something really pivotal for rigorous PBL is that where your students are in their learning versus where your students are in terms of, did they finish the project yet, or are they halfway through the project? And the moves that you make as a teacher throughout the course of a project are very much rooted in research-based practices for when students are at a surface level of learning. For example, they probably need some direct instruction. And then as you go further down the line, when students are ready to start making connections and apply, we start seeing things like Socratic seminars, debates, things like that, working really well as the progress continues. Another, I think, really significant difference is that I know my own classroom, when I was following kind of the basic rules for PBL, we usually had 1 or 2 different products my students could choose from, and that was their choice. That was like, okay, we have choice, we have voice, and I did a lot of project management. When are things due? This is your group. Does everybody have their role? And with rigorous project-based learning, something that we really emphasize is teaching students to apply what they're learning to multiple situations, to multiple perspectives, as a way to stop them from being married to this one beautiful context that really was their hook. Like, I really want to build the rocket ship to the moon. I really want to present to conservationists. Instead, it's let's learn what we need to learn. We're going to apply it to a really cool situation. We're probably also going to apply it to a few more to make sure that we can really stretch and bend and gain those multiple perspectives.
Just for those of the folks out there that might not know what surface to deep to transfer is, let's just clarify surface learning, because I think that we've all made references to surface learning, but I want to be really clear with everyone what that means, because in my experience, when I was leading that nonprofit, that was what was really going on. We had gotten contracted at all these schools that were really in need. The kids couldn't even read, right? They didn't even have the foundational skills, and yet they were trying to do these projects, and it was always trying to find a balancing act between that. When I read Michael's book, it clarified for me what we were struggling with over the course of the 2 years that I was director. So could someone kind of clarify for the folks out there what surface learning is?
Yeah, so I'll tell you. So when we think about like single ideas, right? Like, like I'll go back to my professor in college, right? I needed to know what fungus was. I needed to know what a coliform was. So I needed to know what they are. And one of the things that we want to do is not just like know what they are, but we want to start making meaning in comparison and contrasting with them. So like I know what an environment is, down there by you in Southern California compared to what the local ecosystem is up here. I want to start making meaning of that. That would be the deeper stage. And then when we get into transfers, like how are we then going to apply that in multiple contexts rather than just one? So surface is really that. You think about the lower like recall, it's still like I can't make meaning or apply what I don't know. And I think that that's some of the challenges in past teachers. It's one of the mistakes I made early on. I jumped into the pool of PBL and said, okay, build this awesome project, do this. And kids didn't have that foundational knowledge and skills because I wasn't explicit. And so I think that was one of that learning that we had to have is, in this work, being really intentional in working with staff and teachers around what are the strategies that we're using at Surface that have the most impact, and strategies we're using at Deep as well as transfer. Not only teacher workshop strategies, but then also like the learner strategies that are involved in that.
Yeah. So, go ahead. Who wants to jump?
I was just going to add, Paul, and I think that often in a lot of PBL, Surface is devalued. So it's almost this idea that it doesn't matter. And so what's going to happen is let's focus on building a cool product. You can pick that information up later, but content is like Velcro. Like the more you actually build and cognitively you develop, the more that you can then acquire additional knowledge over time. And that our understanding of the research of transfer, the ability to be able to take content knowledge and ideas and apply it to different situations actually requires knowledge in a different domain. It's not just a skill. And so a lot of what we look at Surface, Deep, and Transfer as equal value. They're all important.
Yeah.
And rigor is really the equal intensity of all of those. So Surface is knowing things. I know ideas. I know facts. I know procedural fluency. That's a good thing. And then we move to the others, right? The pendulum is you just don't want to spend 99% of your time at Surface.
Yeah.
You need to spend enough, and then we need to move on.
Yeah. I remember when I was reading Hattie's The Surface Deep to Transfer, I don't know, it was a paper or something initially, and I was on, I kind of every year in my consulting life have a new thing that I'm exploring with my schools that I've had for like 7 or 8 years, because we can't get rid of each other for some reason, and so they always keep me on my toes, and it became really crystal clear that most of my schools weren't even teaching for transfer, right? Like that wasn't even something that they were thinking about as how does this transfer across content? They were only concerned about the contents and skills of the content they were teaching. And so I think that's also a huge benefit to PBL is that it requires it, right?
Right. And I think to piggyback on that a little bit it's not an educational thing if we don't use the word piggybacking. So I had to toss that in there. It's more than just transfer, right? Because for us, it's transfer. We want to apply in different contexts. And I think traditionally in how teachers tend to interpret PBL because of their own experience is that PBL means about the product, right? Well, I just need to build something and then I'm going to showcase it. And for us, it's really more than that, right? It's more about how do we apply it, like you said, like in different contexts. I can be really good at collaborating with my small group, but if I can't transfer that into another group or another grade level or new school, like that's problematic. So how do we continually, and those are part of those twists and turns along the way.
Cool.
I would just add to that, another example, if we look at this definition of rigor being the equal intensity of those 3 levels of learning, within the context of a unit of study, another thing is, as Kelly and Aaron and Michael and I have done this work around the country and work with teachers around the country, like one of the noticings that I have found is some of the schools that are more traditional, that focus on traditional instruction, students do well at the surface and the deep level. Whereas in contrast, schools that are wall-to-wall project-based learning schools at times, they do very well at transfer. Students can talk about how there is application, but I would say like some of the wall-to-wall PBL schools, students aren't as strong articulating their surface and deep levels of knowledge. And in contrast, the schools that are, more traditional and doing more traditional instruction, aren't as strong with the transfer level knowledge. And so what Rigorous PBL offers is this lens of there should be this equal intensity, and students should be able to discuss all three levels of learning within the context of a rigorous project-based learning unit.
Yeah, I personally believe that your model, that's what it articulated it so well for me, because it was something that at that point in my career, I had not had the experience about even thinking about it that way. And Buck Institute was kind of who we were looking towards as a nonprofit, because we are a nonprofit, for insight on how to do this work at a local level. So, I mean, I think it's just another reason why your work particularly, why this framework is so exciting for us to be able to partner with you all, because I think it solves so many of the inherent problems that PBL might have.
And if I could just, Paul, just really quickly, I think one of the other reasons why we find this language of surface, deep, and transfer to be not only powerful from a design lens, but also from a student agency lens, because it's a language kids can use. It's a language that helps them reference, like, this is the level of learning that I'm in. I think one of the shocking things that I've had going around the world and working in project-based learning is that, and even in my own classes, is that I think my students did pretty well learning how to manage groups. I think they did pretty well learning how to build a product. I think they really struggled with having a command in the language over their own learning. And ultimately, I think what we want to do in agency is helping our kids know what to do when they don't know what to do. And I was really caught by the types of students that John Hattie had worked in New Zealand and Australia, where students could say, I know where I'm going in my learning. I know where I am. I'm at the surface level. This is where I need to go here. And when we use project-based learning as a pathway, and really, when you think about it, you start at transfer. You give them real-world problems, and they're like, "Oh, this is an opening, right? There's a new invasive species that has just attacked us, or there's the ferret is attacking these flightless birds in New Zealand. What do we do?" And then you go back and say, well, now we need to build the surface. Now we need to build the deep. That we say that with students, and then students have that language. So there's this level of clarity. There's this level of ownership over their own learning. So no matter what changes happen, it can really make a substantial difference. So even when they leave a PBL space, they have these tools to develop the agency, or have the agency that they need to express themselves, to handle setbacks. And that's another reason why that typology is helpful, for not just from design, but from an agency perspective.
Yeah, I also connected with Hattie when we saw those videos. We were like, I don't know how many days it took us to be trained to be visible learning consultants, but it inspired me as well. I mean, that's why we wrote impact teams. And I was a principal of a school down by the border of California, and we moved out of program improvement through goal setting. So I really, I think that we both saw, like, we're attracted to that idea. And I just am excited that you figured out how to bring those worlds together with this framework. So Aaron, you might not even be where everybody else is, but you're on the upper left to me.
Perfect. You can just keep looking that way.
Yeah. So there are a lot of skeptics out there. And I think Hattie was not responsible for it. But nobody reads the white book of Hattie. They just look at the effect sizes and think they know everything. Or they look at the visible learning influences in isolation, which is also crazy. And I think also in our country, we don't even know what formative assessment is. That's why the Core Collaborative was founded, because of the misunderstanding around it, right? That people think it's a thing, not a process. So Aaron, this goes to you. There's a lot of skeptics out there about PBL. What are you going to say to them?
I think I said, great, be a skeptic. I think for us, like as a team, when we get together and we plan and we do this work, we want that. We were all there. I mean, I remember years ago, Michael and I sitting around having these conversations about, this group of four is not working. Why are we doing this? Like, why are we doing an entry document in PBL? Why do we do these things? And then we go to these, other trainings and they just double down on, if you give them a group contract, the group will work. Like, I think we're getting distracted from what we want, right? Like, so I would say being a skeptic is good. I think one of the things is like taking on some of these myths about like, why do we do the things that we do in PBL? Is it to check the box or is it to cause learning? Right. And when we're working with students and we're working with staff, it's really about our job is to cause learning and, putting them in these real world and showing them how to transfer that knowledge. Like for me, I know like when I first was trained in PBL, it was that idea of the messy middle and just embrace it. And I found that I was defeating kids with that because I was just like, oh, you're just supposed to struggle. Well, I wasn't giving them the skill sets to learn to get out of the learning pit. And I want to scaffold my way through and differentiate my way through and really support the learner through that process. So I think being skeptical is good. I think if we're, what we say today, like we want to learn more and get more information and improve ourselves tomorrow, just like our learners. So we want to leverage that skepticism about what are some of these challenges that we're all facing, and let's take it head on and put the learner first in this work.
Yeah, I'm with you on that because when I was director of that, I had left my last year as principal and we did 3 times a year PBL and we let the kids all mix up. So we didn't care what the classes were. Everyone was integrated and you saw kids blossom. And then when we started doing the work, we were starting to maybe we should just start this work in middle school because elementary, maybe they just don't have, and so we were waffling and about like, I think, and then I think we became our own skeptic of the work in trying to solve it. But I do think that your framework solves all those issues. Anybody else have anything to say about the skeptics out there regarding PBL? Good. That's awesome. Fine with me, right? So this goes to Kelly and Aaron. And how do you start the rigorous PBL by design process?
Great. I have some advice. So you don't throw away all of your curriculum. You don't need to reinvent the entire wheel. Please don't do that, especially currently. Begin with clarity. What is it for sure you need your students to learn? If you use the language of success criteria, you can say, okay, so what's the success criteria for that? Or if you don't use that kind of language with your colleagues and your students, what do they need to do to show you they can learn it? Okay, if you're clear on that, what are some cool contexts that they could apply those clear learning intentions to? Something that is relevant, something that is captivating. You can bring in a guest speaker from Zoom. That's really fun these days. Also, like our book that we all use it's just a really handy tool. It's not super heady. It is very applicable. Doing a book study with some colleagues can really be a good next step, as well as, hey, if you're able to attend a foundation day training, if you like to receive, if you like to also talk with others as you're processing information and trying to plan together and get feedback from colleagues, our foundation day trainings are really ideal for that. Aaron, to you.
Yeah, I think,
before you jump in, Aaron, for my team that's on there, I think that might be a good idea to maybe do a virtual foundation training that we could just offer through the core collaborative, because I didn't think about it till now, because a lot of schools might not want to invest all in, but I could see them sending some folks to a virtual training that we could deliver. So let's kind of think about that as we move on. I just had the idea and I don't know why I didn't think about it before. Aaron, now you're on.
Yeah, no, I think about that question from like a lens is like, so often I was the only teacher on a campus and trying to take all this on. And so for me, I come at it from like an individual kind of lens and perspective. And I think the first step is just find a friend, like whether it's in person, whether it's even somebody who's not even in education, and I just ask questions like, what do you do? Like, and I'm always looking through that lens about having content about like, how can I connect what I'm doing with, the outside world to make some relevance. So I think finding that and just having those candid conversations goes a long way. It's a great capacity builder on staff. I think about the line from the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson when he's talking to his son. He's like, aim small, miss small, right? Aim small, miss small. And I think that goes to the idea of like, what are your learning goals? Get really clear with that. And what is success around those that isn't tangent on the task, right? So like, what are the actual learning? Just narrow on that. And then I really think about what are the ways that kids can apply it. So like, if I want to boil this down, like what's a change you can make tomorrow? What's the learning outcomes that you have in this unit? And how can kids apply that in the world around them? And I would highly encourage you to include your students' voice in that, right? What is relevant to them is not always relevant to me. And so including their voice is really powerful. And I think that the other thing is, if you're sitting behind a computer, which most of you are all doing right now, is, shameless plug, the core chat, hashtag core chat is an awesome resource. I might not be able to attend every single one. Sorry, Star. But just to be able to backfill that and like to see the resources and what people are talking about is just a great resource that you can just go to get some more information and resources.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump on to what Aaron said. When we partner with schools over the last, 6 years, I think we have about 2,500 schools that have adopted the impact team model. And when we enter, what's always clear to us is a lack of understanding of the standards, or they're teaching standards in isolation, and they don't see how to cluster priority standards together, or the priorities that they have are not the right priorities. So I love both of your advice that it starts with clarity, because what we have found over and over and over again, teachers are following a textbook, and that textbook is built for the masses. And when I audit the textbook, and that's why we started the Core Collaborative, and we're not tied to any textbook company, most of the time, I think it's garbage. And I will say that out loud. Now, I do think there's some really good math resources out there, better than ever, but I have not found really good ones in terms of English language literacy. Maybe there are some good ones now for science. So we are going to stop for just a minute, 3 minutes to be exact. You are going to be sent, those of you, and you can just talk if you don't want to show your face, but we want to give you a chance. It'd be nice if you, but I get it's late in many parts of the country, but we are going to send you to breakouts to just kind of summarize. Now we'll lose everybody. We're going to send you to breakouts to summarize your thinking so far. It might just be something that really interested you, a key takeaway so far, even a connection that you're making to the work. Of course, we'll need you to introduce yourselves briefly. You might want to compliment someone. That goes a long way. I always compliment Isaac on his hair because I don't have any. So we're going to send you to breakouts for 3 minutes to summarize the learning, and then we're going to come back and we're going to finish our panel work. And so Isaac will give instructions on the breakout.
All right, you're going to be sent, and when we call you back, you actually have a 1 minute countdown. So take full advantage of that time to wrap up. It's just a quick 1 minute warning for you. And you'll see it pop up. If you don't see something, find Zoom and pull it to the front, and then you'll see the message. And we'll help you if you get. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Melissa.
What's up? What's up?
How's it going?
How are you? How are you?
I'm good.
I'm the last one left in New York.
Yeah, so for everyone out there, we lived in Brooklyn. We were living in New York. We lived in California for 20 years, and we missed our sons after a year of the pandemic. So we bought a house here. It is cheaper than our rent in New York. So win-win all around. So I know that was really short. We'll get to hopefully some of these ideas, but you can reach out to this team through rigorousPBL.com to ask any questions. And I know that they're all on Twitter. I'm going to do something a little different. But one of the things that I know is concerning everyone right now, and I wish that they were concerned about it before now, but I think equity has really come to the forefront. And this is actually a illustration of our equity framework. And this was written by John Crownapple and Dr. Floyd Cobb. And they are wonderful people. It's a wonderful book. We're doing professional learning internally around these ideas. And so I'm going to take two questions, Kelly and Brad, and tie them to one. And it's going to be, what is the impact that PBL can have on kids? And really, how do we use the rigorous PBL framework to really get to these dignity dispositions around being open-minded, listening to understand, empathy, and patience. And I just kind of put this up here for us to see it, but what we believe at the core collaborative, but if we could model these dispositions as adults, that we could open the door and strengthen equity in our schools. So the question again is, how does this work impact our students? And how does it strengthen equity?
Yeah, so I think there are kind of two ways to approach this question. I think first, at a macro level, big picture level, I think to its heart, project-based learning, the intent is to promote equity. I mean, it's around students having an opportunity to solve a real world problem or challenge. They're given a driving question and they feel empowered in this idea that, we're going to use our content, knowledge, and understanding and apply it to a real world challenge or context. And, I think, and just as Michael has used that word agency throughout the course of the session, I do think it is empowering to all students. So, I think there are kind of those macro big picture things that project-based learning to its core, is empowering and does promote learning for all students. Now, I think more specifically, as we look at the rigorous PBL framework and as it connects to things like empathy, patience, being open-minded and listening to understand, I think there are some real direct correlations if you look at it through the lens of an individual learner in your classroom. So, I think naturally students become empathetic because it's about developing a PBL culture where students become assessment capable, where they are able to self-reflect on where they are, where they've been, and where they're going in their learning. And then it's also about empowering them to participate in peer feedback protocols where they're able to give and receive feedback. So I think, empathy is embedded through the course of that, as is patience. And I think we think about patience, we think about patience in the learning process. And I think one of the things in the rigorous PBL model that we look at is this idea that you're going to have times where you're in a high growth, low achievement time period, right? We've referenced like James Nottingham's learning pit. Like we discussed that within this model, and we want to empower students to think that way. It's okay. That's part of the learning process. You don't automatically go to high growth, high achievement right in the very beginning. So I think the patience kind of comes out through that. And then, being open-minded, again, solving a real world problem or challenge and looking at it through the lens of multiple perspectives, especially when you get in those deep level activities and strategies and success criteria, where students are able to look at a problem or challenge and compare and contrast in multiple perspectives. And then, I think that the listening and understand, I think there's a connection with what I stated earlier about students being able to be assessment capable and give and receive feedback and participate in some of those peer critique protocols. So I think there are kind of these macro ideas of how Project-based learning is a direct correlation with equity and empowering all learners. But then I think there are some really specific ties to the rigorous PBL model and equity.
Thank you for that. Kelly, how does it impact learners?
Well, it does help them learn. That's what I'm going for. It helps them learn in ways that are research-based and proven upon now quite a few studies. So that's a step in the right direction. I have to agree with Brad, especially as far as employing feedback specifically not on did you make a cool project or did you not, but employing feedback to help students push one another as learners and to help them articulate their learning relative to learning intentions and success criteria I had not noticed it, honestly, until this year, the kind of pride and dignity you can instill in students who are not usually asked to give one another feedback, who are usually told how they have done, and that's where they sit. It has been really validating this year in my own practice with my students to employ some really strategic feedback protocols and watch them say, you want me to give her feedback? Like, okay, it feels really great.
Yeah, I see those same connections in our work with impact teams because we do formative assessment, right? And we've integrated SEL into the process. And you see kids just thrive.
Yeah.
You want it. And I think, Michael, what you said in the very beginning really struck me because it's something that we believe at the Core Collaborative, that you're focusing on progress, not proficiency. Right. And I think that alone, right, is we're not judging, we're not evaluating, we're not labeling you, because what we care about, we love you for where you're at, and what we care about is progress. And I really hope that this common formative assessment idea goes away, because I think it's damaged so many kids that didn't even have access to the CFA because it wasn't differentiated to allow access. And I think that from my perspective, PBL just gives so much more access to all of the kids.
And if I could just add really quickly, Paul, there's an article that always strikes me in this equity work called The Pedagogy of Poverty that Haberman wrote, where he really talked about many of our children around the world do not get the opportunity to engage in any innovative type of work, and it's all at surface. And then you have this pedagogy of privilege, where a lot of this work is all these really neat little projects. We really just need to create a frame of pedagogy of impact. How do we really create that impact on developing student agency, of being able to see multiple perspectives, and how do we create that level of openness and listening to others and that level of patience? And I think what's nice about finding a pathway for students to move from surface to deep to transfer is to create a pathway that really does that. And I think that's where rigorous PBL comes in, is it bridges the different levels of learning, values this level of agency, and creates a culture where it's like, hey, you can grow and we're going to support you in doing that. And that's the idea of bringing these pieces together.
Yeah, when Linda Darling Hammond was interviewed, I don't know when during the pandemic, because I think I had the TV on nonstop when I was working, which is not healthy. But she had mentioned that the schools that were doing the best with remote learning were by far schools that had quality implementation of PBL. And it made all the sense to me, because we have kids that couldn't even check the calendar, couldn't create a deadline, couldn't project manage. And so I could see how rigorous PBL would support that work as well. We have one more question, and then we have our Arrows authors, which I'm really excited about. And this goes to you, Michael. And but what does this work look like for leaders of teams, schools, and systems? And if you guys don't know Michael, I was out in Utah doing a lot of consulting, because I think we work with most of the districts in Utah. And Michael's name just kept, and I didn't know him at that point except via Twitter. And his name kept coming up. So he's written slews of books, and we actually need to get all his books on the rigorous PBL pathway page, because I think they all kind of go together. So the question is, like, what do we say to leaders?
Well, I think the first thing that, to me, when I work with leaders, I really look at what are the outcomes we want from students. And part of the rigorous PBL book is really built on these three things of how do we make sure kids are clear? How do we make sure we create a culture of progress? And how are we ensuring that students are learning at all three of these levels? So for me, it's working with leaders and saying, Are we looking at those outcomes? And are we building systems around those? And so that's what I would work with leaders on. Do we have those things in place? And then are we modeling the practices that we expect around a methodology that really ensures student agency? Then we need to see teacher agency, which means we need to model that in our staff meetings. We need to model that in terms of the problems that we're designing for our own staff. If we're not running rigorous PBL types of leadership practices, we're probably not going to be seeing those levels of practices systematically with students. So it's this notion of model. The things that we expect to see, we need to be able to see from our leaders, and it goes down from there. As a superintendent of a school district, that's what I really try to do. I mean, we've had, this pandemic is a great driving question that we've been trying to solve. And ultimately, I have to go back to my staff and say, how do we work on that? The same thing we need to say to students, how do we solve some of these problems together?
Yeah, and Michael and I have been emailing back and forth because I've been doing more principal coaching than ever, and it's been some of the most gratifying work I've ever done as a consultant this year. I've never seen so many principals cry, but I mean, just having the honor to listen to them and support them. And then I was like thinking, wow, this would be really great for Rigorous PBL to have a leadership piece, because I think for school leaders, they're hour sessions. We do them on Zoom. And to be quite honest, I think it's really great for leaders because they just need someone else outside of the system they work with to think through this. So I think that's something that we are thinking about doing. I know that, Michael, I'm not trying to say something without an agreement, but I do believe that the leadership piece is really important because I do know that they need people with your level of expertise. So we are now, and I think we're going to do the honoring impact at the very end, where we're going to honor somebody that from the last month or two that we really have seen impact. But I wanted to bring in Star, who is going to be, and she is our publisher for our sister company, Mimi and Todd Press. And she is going to introduce our authors from our latest book, Arrows. We'll have a quick conversation, and then we'll wrap up by honoring impact of someone that you know over the last couple of months that you see has really made a difference in the lives of kids.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Paul. What I will say is, if we are on the topic of honoring impact as we think about Arrows, is this book does tremendous tribute to the district that it comes out of. And I'd love for the authors to really share a little bit of their why around that. So Carrie Rosebrock and Sarah Henry, you guys take it away.
Thank you so much, Star and Paul, and for everyone for just sticking around and all the awesome work that you're doing. I'm so excited to dig into this Rigorous PBL now. I would say we wrote Arrows. We started this journey several years ago because we worked together in a district for about 12 years. I think we were together, Sarah and I. And over the course of that time, we saw a transformation happen where the leadership approach very much became about how do we invest in people, not programs. You were talking about that together piece. Michael said, how do we solve these problems together? And I think that when there aren't systems in place for educators to know how to collaborate and what's expected, or to have impact teams or PLCs, as we call them, then we can very quickly feel like we're in silos. And what we saw happen in our district was an emphasis and a priority to build those teams and to bring educators together to believe in the power truly of their decision making and real collective teacher efficacy around what is best for kids. And after 2 years, all of the data points started to skyrocket. And we know that we don't change systems or refine systems just to see the data and the numbers. It's about the kids, but there was proof that was hard to dispute. And so what started to happen was we had all these different schools calling and visiting and calling and visiting. And how do you do that? And where are you from? Oh my goodness, tell me the secret. And so one day, Sarah and I, kind of said to each other, we all kind of joke about one day when we write the book, and we were like, we need to write the book, because a visit is one thing, but what do you do? For example, when it's a COVID year and you can't go do a school visit or you can't get to people. So we started the process before the pandemic because we just we were hearing this need. When you work in a system that has a strong culture or has those teams in place, it can be difficult to recognize that there are other districts and leaders who were trying to figure it out. And it can be hard to see the need, but we saw it, we heard it, and decided to capture it in Arrows. And so Arrows is really, it's the story that honors the impact of this wonderful district in central Indiana that is committed to a systems-based approach, come hell or high water. Hopefully I can say that. And it is so, it's so greatly benefited them. And especially, as Sarah will share, even in the midst of the hardest, unimaginable year in education possible this past year with COVID, because of the dedication to teams and people, not programs, because we've said, you know what, we're going to have the burden of no, and we aren't going to be the flavor of the month club. Because of that, we have teams who are able to weather the storm. So, you know, why did we write it? To honor this district and all of the leaders and the people that we love and care about, and we've seen do this really hard work. And now I think Sarah's going to kind of share how we see this work honoring the impact moving forward in the future and how it's relevant now.
Yeah, I think that, like Carrie mentioned, you know, just happened that the pandemic, you know, shows up and our systems were in place for, this will be the 11th year now. And we just keep perfecting and perfecting. And so really we've been at school every day in person. We've only had about, I think it was 800 students over our entire district, and we're a district of about 10,000 that have chosen to work from home. So we have our teachers maybe have an online class for those kiddos, but we've been moving on. We're still PLCing, Zoom style, or spread out in rooms. But I think it's allowed us to keep chugging along, even though the world's kind of fallen apart. We have our systems. We know what's best for our kids. And so I think that's really played out. I think especially right now, teachers are just, you know, educators in general, we're frazzled, we're tired, we were before. And I think this book also honors that idea that it's okay to say, like, okay, this is too much. Can we narrow the focus? Can we pick one plate we're going to juggle and just really get good at it? And I think that oftentimes educators feel like it's not okay to speak up to something like that. And I think now more than ever, it's time to honor that, you know, sometimes too much is too much.
What I love about what you said is, you know, I work all over the world now, which is kind of frightening. But like what I always realize is that pretty much every system is under extreme initiative fatigue, and superintendents come and go. And so I think what I love about your book is you really get to the ideas about how to reduce initiative fatigue through focus. And, you know, Michael's the superintendent, he gets it, but rarely do superintendents even stay around long enough. Or is there a strategic plan that if a superintendent leaves, that they're bringing in someone to keep up with the strategic plan that has been created? And so I think that this will be a great contribution to the literature, and we couldn't be happier to publish it. We are a new publishing company, but we're doing pretty well so far. And under Star's direction, I know that it is even going to get better because she has a ton of talent. And we're just really grateful that you chose us. So we are going to end with our panel because Carrie and Sarah already honored impact to their district, which is really cool because usually you don't hear people honoring districts. Usually districts are the enemy out there. So I think that says a lot about your district. But with our panel, we'd like to end tonight by honoring the impact of a team, a person, a school that is making a tremendous difference for kids. It doesn't have to be that long, but we want to get it out there, and we're going to use these clips on Twitter and social media to hopefully flood social media with positive instead of the other. And you all know what I'm talking about. So, Kelly, who are you going to honor?
I'd like to honor the impact of the Math 1 team at Napa High School in Napa, California. They are open and ready and crushing it this year in a pandemic.
That is so cool. Brad.
I would like to honor the impact of the science and math departments at Carmel High School, who have just done a fantastic job this year during the pandemic.
Very cool. People need to hear that. Aaron.
I'd like to honor the impact of just our administration team at our school at Napa New Technology High School, because not only are they focusing on the academic growth, but such a hard focus on the socio-emotional needs of our students and always making sure that kids are there and accounted for, so the mental well-being for our kids.
Michael.
I'm going with my own school district's nursing staff and custodial staff. I mean, just watching them today and this whole year, they need a lot of love, and they've just done an incredible job.
That's awesome. And I'm going to honor my team because being a CEO of an educational consulting company during the pandemic, I wouldn't say is the best business, and trying to launch Mimi and Todd. And I know that a few of them are on tonight, but we have weathered the storm and not had to lay off anyone. And it is really because of their dedication and hard work. And with that, Isaac's going to give you a preview for next week. I wanted to thank the Rigorous PBL by Design team. You were awesome. And thank our Arrows authors. And we're really excited. And we probably need to do a special collaborative conversation just about your book, and maybe bring a panel on from your school district, because I think it would be great to kind of hear how this has impacted teachers. Sound good?
Absolutely.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Isaac, you're on.
All right, this will be quick because the power of everything we do is in the Learning Network. We want to get you to stay engaged with us, so please reach out. We're on all social media, and as Aaron shared, we have a wonderful core chat on Twitter every Tuesday, 6:30 Eastern, and would love to have any of you join us. And then we're very excited. We got so many great things coming up. You can see on our website, but we're really excited about March 16th, our next Build Back Wiser. So you can see that's during the school day, so you don't have to stay up late, depending on where you are. But we'd love for you to join us for that, and just really appreciate all of you sharing your two most valuable assets with us, your time and your attention. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
See you guys. Have a good night. Do something nice for yourself.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.